Welcome to the Legal Aid New South Wales Law webinar, Working with Seniors, a Practical Guide to Improved Practice. Good morning, everyone. My name's Bridget Barker and I work in the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. This webinar will be about 1 hour and 45 minutes in total, which includes time for questions and answers. The webinar is being recorded, so if you have to leave, you can come back to it through the Legal Aid New South Wales YouTube channel. If you are having trouble hearing us over the internet, you do have the option to telephone into the webinar to listen using your phone while you follow the presentation online. The phone number and access details are in the webinar control panel and the reminder email sent about an hour ago. We apologise that there is no live captioning as we are speaking today. However, the recording of the webinar will have closed captions. We'll now have a look at some features of the webinar control panel for those of you joining us today who may not have used GoToWebinar before. To let you know how to ask questions, you can type them in at any time in the question box. If we don't answer them at all during the webinar, we'll try to get to them at the end. You don't have to be shy. No other participants can see your question. It's only visible to us. So to ask questions, if you can see the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, which is on the picture of like the picture on the slide that you can see now, in the control panel, there's a box called questions where you can type in questions. Sometimes your control panel may shrink. To expand it again, there's a red or orange coloured button with an arrow in it. If you can't see the full control panel now or this control panel shrinks, you can click on that button to make it reappear. Just to let you know, there are some handouts which you can also access from the control panel under the handouts section. There's 4 different handouts there for you to access today. And we'll also give you details about referral points at the end of the webinar. After the webinar, you will receive a survey and we encourage you to complete the survey because it gives us valuable feedback about this webinar and other topics you'd like us to present webinars on. Just to check that you can hear us, would you mind typing into the question box where you're joining us from today? Dharawal country, thanks. Gosford, Campbelltown, people can hear us. Deniliquin, Wollongong, that's great, all over the place. Thanks everybody for letting us know. Just one more technical slide. To enlarge or reduce your view of the speakers, you can click and drag this bar that you can see on your screen now. So we'll start the webinar proper now. Again, welcome to the Legal Aid New South Wales Law webinar, Working with Seniors, a Practical Guide to Improved Practice. To start with, we want to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional owners and custodians on whose lands we are broadcasting from today and from where our participants are joining us today. For me, that is the Widjabul people of the Bundjalung Nation. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. My name is Bridget Barker. I work in the Community Legal Education branch at Legal Aid New South Wales. Today we have a great panel of people speaking in this webinar who you will be introduced to shortly. The focus of this webinar is on issues that might arise when you are working with seniors. The panel will share their experiences and some practical tips to help improve our practice. We're just going to start before the panel is introduced by running a short poll. In the registration email and reminder emails, we asked people to take the ageist quiz. So we're just going to run a poll to see whether you had an opportunity to do that. and also whether you were surprised by your responses. Okay, so the first question is, did you have an opportunity to complete the ages quiz? I can see people are responding now. Okay, I'll close that off so we can see the responses.
Oh. 82% said no. Oh.
That's a bit disappointing, people.
Oh, well.
Perhaps you can go back to the email and have a look at it later. The next question, which I'll share with you now, is for those of you who did complete the quiz, were you surprised by how you responded?
No.
No. Looks like people weren't surprised at all. Okay, and we have one final question for you. And unfortunately, it's only for those who did complete the ages quiz. Are you more ageist than you thought?
No.
Actually, it's a bit more mixed than that. I'll just close off the quiz and then share the responses with you. So most people weren't surprised, but some were. 21% were, and 21% were somewhat surprised. Well, that's interesting, everybody. Thanks to those who have found the time to complete the quiz. It only takes a short amount of time, so hopefully you can. Okay, just closing that off now. Just got a bit of a lag here, everybody. Sorry about that.
While we're lagging, I'll just do a call out to the Every Age Counts website. That's where the Are You Ageist web quiz comes from. Encourage you all to have a little look at that website. It's got some fantastic resources around aging.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, now I'll hand over to Mary Lovelock, Senior Solicitor with the Elder Abuse Service, and to Jenny Henstock, Project Officer with the Elder Abuse Service.
Thanks, Bridget. Welcome.
Thanks, Bridget.
My name's Mary Lovelock, and I'm the Senior Solicitor of the Elder Abuse Service, which runs from our Legal Aid Office in Gosford. And Jenny Henstock is my colleague as a Project Officer with the service. So Jenny will talk a little bit more later, but I just wanted to kind of raise the issue. So why are we starting off this discussion with a quiz on ageism? Well, if we are lucky, we will all grow old. The demographics show that our population is very different to our post-war baby boom population. By 2066, nearly 1 in 4 of us will be over 65. And this statistic, which I read yesterday, really surprised me, that what our fastest growing demographic is. It's people aged 100 and over. So currently there's about 6,000 centenarians now, and by 2060 there will be nearly 7 times that number. And what our older life can look like depends on what we do now to respond to our aging demographics. So things like identifying and calling out the systemic barriers, like ageism, that stand in the way of older people living their best life, living life to their fullest capacity. And then what this webinar focuses on, which is improving our capacity to work with older people in a service setting. So this webinar draws on the expertise of our panel to give us some really practical information about working with older people. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. We want it to be interactive. You're welcome to throw questions at us in the chat box. It'll be monitored. We're happy to take questions. We've all worked together for a period of time. We've got some rapport going, and we look forward to sort of sharing our expertise with you today. So I'll just hand over to Jenny Henstock, who's the project officer with the service at the moment.
Hi guys, thank you so much, Mary and Bridget, for your introductions today. Before I introduce you to our panel members, I just wanted to go through a few really basic practical things that we should be considering when we're making appointments and seeing older clients, because it's really easy to forget about these basics, but it can make the difference of whether or not your client is comfortable. And so we do need to turn our mind to these basic things before we meet with our clients. And I think we're a little out of practice doing face-to-face appointments, so it's a good reminder at this point in time, I think. So one of the things that we need to consider when we're making appointments for older clients is mobility and accessibility in our offices. So we need to be aware that many of our older clients may have mobility supports such as walkers or wheelchairs, and we really need to be able to make sure that access is available for that type of mobility support. Older people may also need a carer to attend their appointments, so we need to make space for that as well. Some older people will be hearing impaired, and so we need to ask the question whether there is anything that we can do to assist around this. It may be that an older person has one ear that they hear out of better. They may need you to speak louder or more slowly. And if we are speaking louder, we also need to consider, do we need to book an interview room further away from other staff so that we're not going to be interrupting with work? Of course, we always have to ask our clients if they need interpreters because we want them to fully understand what we're talking about. We also need to ask and consider whether a certain time of day is better for the older person because they may be taking medications that may cause drowsiness. They may have different routines that they need to stick to. Appointment times may need to be longer for older people, particularly at the beginning when you're first meeting them. Lawyers, for example, may need to take extra time to consider the capacity of their client to give instructions on complex legal matters, and you need to give time for that older person to be able to properly tell their story. We don't want to use any kind of jargon, and we want to make extra time for our older clients to really understand the legal concepts that we are discussing with them. If we're making a phone appointment or even asking someone to assist our clients coming into the office, we need to find out whether they are living with the person that they are seeking advice about. The clients may live with a partner, an adult child or a carer that they are actually seeking advice about. So we need to be really mindful around these things so that our client can speak to us freely when they're having their appointments with us. And finally, one of the things I think that you'll find consensus across all of our panel members is that collaboration is the key to working with older people. We don't live in silos. We might be helping the client with a legal matter or a medical matter, but it's really important to know about the older person's support networks and to be collaborating with those, with your client's authorities, so that you can give your older clients more holistic care and get better results from your interactions with them. Certainly one of the things that I think came across from everyone on our panel before this webinar when we were preparing is that just because an older person is older than us, it doesn't mean that they should not have a voice, and it certainly doesn't mean that they should be excluded from decision making in their lives. So it's really important that we make sure that our older clients feel heard. I just wanted to acknowledge a limitation of this webinar because we are restricted to a short time period. We're aiming to provide some basic information about working with older people, and we're drawing from the expertise of a really amazing panel. But we also acknowledge that when we're working with elders from the First Nations community and culturally diverse communities, there are going to be other cultural considerations that you need to turn your mind to. That is not within the scope of our discussion today at any great length, but there are other resources that you can draw from in that regard. So I'd now like to introduce you to our amazing panel, and I want to thank everybody for making the time to come along and speak with us today. And thank you, Mary. As we know, she is our senior solicitor with the Elder Abuse Service at Legal Aid New South Wales. We're joined with by Simone Hornell, who is a senior clinician elder abuse with the Older People's Mental Health Service. Simone is a social worker with 22 years of experience and is currently a senior clinician elder abuse with the Older Persons Mental Health Service. This role supports mental health clinicians to respond to clients who are experiencing or at risk of elder abuse, and to work towards positive psychological outcomes so that they can ultimately live safely and with dignity in the community. Sasha Kisarani, and I apologise if I got that wrong, Sasha, your surname, is the solicitor with the Legal Aid New South Wales Service. Sasha's worked with Legal Aid New South Wales as a solicitor since 2015. She's provided civil law outreach services widely across the state, including working with seniors in the community. She feels strongly about seniors' rights and improving seniors' access to justice. Jackie Stapleton is a social worker at Legal Aid New South Wales. Jackie has been practising as a social worker since 2003 and is currently working with the Legal Aid Elder Abuse Service. Jackie has previously worked in child protection and with New South Wales Health, including supporting vulnerable people who have been victims of trauma. Jackie's focus is promoting rights, safety and autonomy of clients. And finally, Edward Reid is a social worker with the Older Persons Mental Health Unit at St George Hospital. Edward has 9 years experience as a social worker with the Older Persons Mental Health Unit at St George Hospital, and he does not believe in a one-size-fits-all health service. He also advocates for person-centred healthcare as defined by the older persons themselves. So thank you all to our panel. I'd now like to perhaps ask Jackie Stapleton, our social worker with the Elder Abuse Service. Jackie, are you able to just have a little chat to us and give us some information about the types of things that you do when you're first meeting an older client, please?
No problem, Jenny, and thanks for the introduction. Thanks everybody for having me. When meeting a client for the first time, there are several things I consider and aim to achieve. Firstly and simply, I always introduce myself. I explain where I work, my role, and confirm the client consents to speak with me. Whilst this seems very simplistic, it is an essential part of establishing a professional relationship based on respectful and transparent communication. Obtaining the client's consent is also a first step in demonstrating that they are at the centre of this discussion, that they do have choices and are in control. When working with clients, it is my goal to earn their trust and create an environment in which they feel safe to speak with me. It is natural for people to feel anxious about sharing their very personal and private information about themselves and their family. Particularly our older clients, we know they don't typically seek assistance. They don't like making a fuss. Building rapport with clients provides a sense of calm and reassurance that they are in a safe space to share their story. Often when people do seek help, they may feel overwhelmed by their situation and have difficulty knowing where to start. I try and support my client by engaging and navigating the conversation, by asking open questions respectfully and without judgment, by using simple, clear language with no jargon. From a practice perspective, there are assessment tools and frameworks that may guide professionals within this conversation, but essentially the goal is to understand a client's situation from a holistic perspective. So the client may talk about their experiences, identify their concerns, and explore options to make informed decision. A client may need support to take the steps they want to, in the time they want to actually deal with these concerns. Being patient and allowing time is essential. It is important to be led by the client. Sometimes they don't wish to make changes straight away. They may need time to consider options to build up their confidence and be empowered and enabled to make a change to their situation. We need to respect people's choices, but also empower them by providing information about their rights and providing opportunity to access services to enhance their safety. Isolation can make people very vulnerable. A significant protective factor for older people can be connecting with services, having links in the community. An option as simple as having a regular GP who they trust and getting help at home can be a great starting point.
Thanks, Jackie. That's great. Edward, I wonder if we can ask you about what you believe client-centred healthcare means, and how do you achieve this in a hospital setting?
I guess what it means for me is explained to me by the person themselves. It's really important for me to be aware that I have particular agendas and to be conscious of my agendas so they don't overtake my engagements with the elderly. I understand as a government agent, I'm there to serve the folks that I meet with and not to manage them, not to guide them anywhere, but to be guided by them. Some of the key preparations that I've engaged with over the years of my social work in preparation to help these folks has been to study the laws of informed consent, best interests. In studying those aspects of the law, and it doesn't take much reading. High Court case in 1992, Rogers v. Whitaker, has defined informed consent, best interests. In really short captions, it's easy for non-lawyers to read and understand how to understand those particular aspects of my care. And what's really important for me is to not go in guessing, and in my studies have enabled me not to guess. I also need to be conscious of cultural data. Mistakes I've made in the past were, for example, asking a Jewish person what their Christian name was. Putting my hand out to shake the name of a woman who was practicing the Muslim faith. So, you know, my naiveties have been potentially really offensive when I could have found out with not too much reading preparation. Yeah.
I think that's a really great point.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. There's just, there is a real echo coming through, and I'm not sure, Edward, whether it might be your Bluetooth speaker or, yeah, and I don't know if perhaps an answer might be for people to mute themselves when they're not speaking directly to reduce the sound. Quite a few of the participants mentioned that there's this issue.
Is that better, Bridget? Bridget, can you hear us better now?
I can hear you without an echo now. Yeah, that is better. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Edward. Like, I really appreciate your acknowledgement of that cultural aspect. And as I said, it's, you know, that could be the focus of a whole other webinar. And certainly we will share some resources at the end that people might be able to take advantage of if they want to look into that further. I'm really interested about this, guiding principle of client-focused care, and I'd like to ask Simone perhaps to talk to us a little bit about that. Simone, Simone, we know that sometimes clients will choose to stay in an unsafe environment, and that might be because they want to stay living with a parent, with a carer, an adult child, or a partner, and they may be the abusers in a certain situation. If we have a client-centered practice, how do we move forward with a client if they're choosing to stay in that unsafe environment? Can you talk to that, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jenny. I think this is a situation that comes up certainly quite a lot in my role currently and in previous roles I've had. Where often as clinicians we might assess that a person's situation is, really unsafe. That might involve, providing them some education around that. Often, clients don't identify that the situation they're in is actually abusive or is unsafe. So part of our role is to really provide some education around that for them and raise their awareness. Look, I think ultimately we have to respect our clients' decisions. Clients are able to make decisions that we may see as not being the best decision for them, but that's ultimately up to them. And I think, that's important. And I think feeding into that issue around giving clients a voice that's really important, that they're able to make informed decisions. And part of our role is really to empower our clients. So making sure that, we have raised their awareness, we've provided that education to them. It might involve giving them some information about what their options are in terms of what services that we may be able to refer them onto. I mean, often in my current work, I'll educate them around, certainly the legal aid elder abuse service is a common one that I talk to clients about, and I often introduce that as a way to make sure they can make informed decisions and know what their options are. Often people get quite concerned when they think of legal aid. They sort of think, I don't want to get, my son or daughter or the person in trouble. I don't want to have to go to court. So it's really important just to remind them that, that's not necessarily the outcome, but it's really important for them to have the information and to know how to make decisions that are well informed. So I think, that's it. I think it's really important that we listen to them. I think the other thing is we need to be realistic as clinicians about what we can achieve. And sometimes what that means is that we can't actually eliminate the risk. We can't actually remove that client from an at-risk situation, but we might be able to look at, well, how can we increase their support? Or particularly for those clients who are really isolated, how can we actually support them to reduce that isolation? So sometimes that might be introducing or talking to them about getting some in-home supports if they don't have that, looking at how we can engage them more positively in the community. And that provides a couple of things in that it increases their socialisation, their connection, reduces their isolation, but it also can introduce some safe people into their lives who can provide some monitoring as well. So that's really important. And I think even that with the sort of those clients living in abusive relationships, in my previous role, which was in a community allied health team, we worked a lot with elderly people where, allied health would come in, they'd make lots of assessments and they would say, look, they're really unsafe in their situation. They can't manage their, activities of daily living. They have to have supports in place. And we might come in as a social worker and really educate them and talk to them about the importance of services and what's available and how they can access them. But at the end of the day, that client may still make the decision that, no, I don't actually want to engage those services. And we have to respect that. We can't force our clients to make those decisions. They've got to make them for themselves. And sometimes as well, it might take them some time. So sometimes I've, given them some information, let them know of the resources or options that are available to them. And I might sort of follow up with them in a week or a couple of weeks and give them some time just to think about it as well. And then they might come back, they may change their mind, but they may still say, look, I'm not wanting to, to take any further action at this stage.
Yeah,
Do you
make
mind
a
if
really
I
good point.
just interrupt there's quite a few questions coming in. So one of them is on the point that Simone was just speaking about, that sometimes solicitors encounter elderly clients that can be ambivalent about taking action that might be required to resolve the situation, such as complaining about the presence of an adult son in the house but not wanting to take steps to evict them. Do any of you have any tips about how to manage that?
We're all smiling because this is such a big component of the work that we do. It is such a big component of the work that we do. And I might draw upon ask my colleagues, does anybody want to put forward some ideas that we've tried within the Elder Abuse Service or through our collaborations with Simone?
Yeah, so I might jump in. Look, it is something that we do see a lot of. And I think that the important thing here is that we need to respect the fact that, you know, just because there might be a senior person doesn't mean that they don't still have that ability to make that decision for themselves. So a lot of the time we want to be able to jump in and just fix the situation, because there might just be a really, you know, really straightforward legal response. Take out an ABO, make sure he gets out of the house. But what we find a lot of the time is that elderly people are less inclined to want to do that, especially if it's their own child. So what we really try to do is support the older person to try and empower them to appreciate the severity of their situation, and that it's not healthy, and it's something that could be dangerous not only to them, but something that's not helping, you know, their child or the abuser as well. So that's why it's really important, especially in our team, that we work with social workers during our calls. We try to help support the client in a more roundabout way, because a lot of the time they might understand the legal response and their avenues, but it's just not something that they're willing to step into and to make that leap. So sometimes it might just mean that we're with them a little bit longer. You know, we support them, we check in on them, we make sure that they have the support services around them just in case something does get quite serious and they need to be able to drastically make that change. But that's why it's really good that we work with the community to try and help as well, because a lot of the times these older people are isolated. It might just be them and the abuser, and they just don't see a way out. So by empowering them and supporting them to be able to have a network and a plan in case things tend to get a lot worse than they are, then it means that they're kind of able to better appreciate their situation and how they can get out of it, even if it means that we can't kind of get them out of it immediately because it is their decision.
And if I can add to that, Sasha, I think one of the things that I've seen with the Elder Abuse Service, and where you have that combination of lawyers but also social workers, is that sometimes to be able to help the older person, you might actually have to help and connect the other party into services, because particularly if it's an adult child, you have this, you know, real parental instinct to protect your children no matter how old they are, and often if they're behaving badly, you want to fix that rather than get them in trouble. So I think that's been a really great eye-opener for me, to be able to see that sometimes it's not just your client that you need to consider when it's an older person. If you help the adult child of them, for example, to get help, you're helping them, and you're also then helping them be able to resolve their issues. So that's a little bit different to a lot of other areas in law, I think.
The other thing on that, Jenny, is that sort of reflects our human rights model, where the older person is at the centre of all decision making. So very often, you know, clients might be referred to us through the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service as being at risk, and an ABO may or may not be taken out. But say often they're referred to us where there's not enough evidence to take out an ABO, but the service is concerned about this older person, and so the client's referred to us. And then if we were to ask the older person, what are you most worried about? They probably wouldn't say, I'm worried about my safety, my son or my daughters are behaving appallingly. What they will probably say was, I'm desperately concerned for my son. He has a mental illness. If he doesn't live here, he has nowhere else to go. He's on the streets. And that kind of that's a story that there's a number of different tweaks about. But for so many of our cases, that kind of represents the complexity that is kind of elder abuse. And it's that acknowledgement of where the client is at, no matter what their scenario is. And so by saying, okay, so tell us about your son's situation. What supports does your son have? And even though it's not our primary focus, our primary focus is always on the older person. It's applying that human rights model and saying to the older person, what's going to help you? And we know through our experience with domestic violence research and studies that very often we have to provide those services to that other party to be able to fully support that older person. It's just sort of something that's become part of our model, and it's something that our social workers have enhanced our capacity to be able to recognise that and work through those conversations.
Mary, thank you for that. I just would like to Sasha's got a really perfect example of some comments made by an older person that really is a great example of that. Sasha, can you share your client's experience that you've recently been working with us?
Sure. So I've had a client recently. I've been working on her with Jackie. Her situation in a nutshell is that she has a child who has been abusing her, both psychologically, emotionally, and physically. The child herself she's an adult, but she has significant mental health conditions. She's got schizophrenia, autism, and a few other things. She's also addicted to ice. So she's become quite violent with her mum. She doesn't live with her, but she does visit often. And when she does, she'll, take things, she'll hit her mum, she'll push her to the ground, and she just kind of acts in a way that her mum doesn't recognise anymore. She finally reached out to our service to say that she's become scared and she just doesn't know what to do. So we've been supporting her to try and encourage her to, put in these legal remedies to try and encourage her to get an AVO. However, the client initially was very hesitant, and the main reason for this is that her child, she feels, doesn't really have any sort of supports. Despite being connected with, some agencies, her biggest concern is, and she said this to me, which was quite distressing, but she said, I'm going to die eventually, that's fine. What I'm most worried about is who will love her when I'm gone. Who will care for her? What will happen if I don't notice that she's not around for a week? Who's going to check in on her? And that for her was just the primary concern. It wasn't her safety, it wasn't anything else. And for that reason, she was really hesitant to put in an AVO because she didn't want to break what she thought was her daughter's only connection. So, that's a really typical situation for us. And I think it adds a level of complexity to the work that we do. Because what I had to do was encourage her to help her daughter by helping herself. And we've worked with her, and she's actually come quite a long way because she now recognises that, allowing the situation to stay the way it wasn't healthy for either of them. It wasn't helping their relationship at all. And she's kind of reached a stage now where she realises that she just doesn't want to be that victim anymore. But in doing that, we spoke to her about how she could help support her daughter and how she could be confident that her daughter was being cared for. There is a guardianship order in place. There are a few things. So by helping inform her of the processes and the situation that can support her daughter, she feels more comfortable in putting up some of those barriers to ensure her own safety. Yeah.
And I'm just going to interrupt you there, Sasha, because I know that you spoke to me about some further conversations that you'd had with that mother, and she actually was kind of warming up to the idea of putting better safety planning in place to protect herself while also helping her sister, and I think that's, her daughter. And I think that's really a good example of where social workers can open people up to being more accepting of legal assistance when they're kind of getting that social stuff under control, which is usually their primary concern when they're reaching out for help. You did talk about a guardian that client had a guardian, and that's a really good point. I would like you to talk to us a little bit further about that. Obviously, there's a few things from a legal point of view that you need to consider when you are supporting an older person. So off the top of my head, from my understanding, there'll be things that you need to consider, like capacity. There'll be things that, like, whether there's an interim guardian involved. So can you talk to us firstly about what capacity is and what you do to gauge whether your older client has capacity?
Yeah,
Can I just interject there? Just a couple of things. There is still an echo that's quite disrupting when you're trying to listen. So perhaps if you're not speaking, if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves. I know it's not ideal for an easy conversation, but it seems it's quite a distracting sound for the audience. And I do have a number of other questions, so perhaps after Sasha addresses this one, I'll run through those for the audience. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so capacity. It's definitely something that we need to turn our minds to when we're having advice with older clients. And I think it's really important that we always presume a person has capacity. So we shouldn't, go into a conversation with a 97-year-old, for example, and just assume that because they're so old, they can't possibly understand what's going on. That's the first thing we can't do. We also need to appreciate that capacity is decision specific. So it doesn't mean necessarily that if a person has a condition that affects their cognitive decision making or affects their memory, that they won't be able to engage with you at all, and they won't be able to understand some of the things that you're talking about and be able to make some of the decisions. So for this reason, it's important to assess it on a decision basis. Another thing that we should do is kind of not assume that a person lacks capacity just because of how they look or how they might present in one specific situation. You've kind of touched on this before, but there are a whole range of things that might affect a person's ability or capacity during a conversation, particularly if they're on medication. Maybe mornings are bad, maybe nights are bad. Certain times of day they could be really stressed. Need to appreciate that nobody really enjoys speaking to a solicitor, so they may just be kind of really not looking forward to the conversation, and that might make them kind of stressed and tense and not fully able to engage with you. So it requires a bit of time to help them warm up before they're able to speak to you comfortably. It's also important to kind of gauge capacity not by a person's decisions, so not by the decisions they make, but by their decision-making ability. So we've touched on this as well. We can't just assume that because someone's making poor decisions about their situation that they don't understand and fully appreciate their situation. It may just be, for example, that it is their own child, and maybe they do rely on them for certain things. Maybe they are their carer. So getting out isn't necessarily the easiest option, even though it might be the right option. So that's, it's definitely something that's always in our mind as solicitors, to make sure that a person has that capacity to engage with you. And we always try to kind of appreciate substitute decision making as a last resort. So getting other people in and speaking to them for the older person is something that we try to avoid if possible, unless there is kind of medical evidence suggesting that they really don't have the capacity to speak with you. I guess to touch more on guardianship, Jenny, is that, someone puts in an enduring guardian if they lost capacity. So they need to make the decision while they do still have capacity. And then it kind of takes effect once they've lost capacity. And those sort of decisions are lifestyle and health-based decisions about, where they might live or what support services they might need, who they see, and medical or dental treatment that they get. For us as lawyers, the legal test is that the person understands both the nature and the effect of the document at the time that it's made. So it's really important that they understand, what an enduring guardian is, what powers they have, the nature of what exactly it'll mean when it takes effect. Do they know that they can have more than one person? Do they know that there are a whole range of things that the person can have power over, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to give them power for everything? So, you know, these are really important things for us as solicitors going into these sort of appointments, because something like enduring guardianship and power of attorney, it gives someone really complete control over someone's life. So these aren't decisions that should be entered into lightly, but in situations where the person can't safely make these decisions for themselves, they are really important decision-making objects. So yeah.
Sasha, can I interrupt and ask, do you have any tips that you can provide about when you have a client who might have an enduring guardian who has lost capacity to make complex decisions about their own lives? How do you keep your service to the client centered whilst taking into consideration the guardian's views about the circumstances?
Sure. So what we try to do in any respect is have the client involved. So regardless of whether or not there is an enduring guardianship or power of attorney, we always want to make sure the client has a voice in our service. So it's really important that where possible and where practical, the client is engaged as well and is aware of what's going on. There may be situations where that's just not possible or where the client doesn't want to be involved, and that's okay too. But what we really try to do is make sure that the client's voice is always the voice that we're leading with. And in these instances, you know, if it means that we are dealing with an enduring guardian, we will speak to them, but we'll always make sure that, you know, they are acting in the client's best interests. There are certain situations where a client will come to us, or a community member or a health person will come to us, and their concern will be with the guardian. You know, they'll think that the guardian may be taking advantage of the client, that they don't have their best interests at heart. And in those situations, it can be quite delicate, because where typically you would speak with the guardian for the client's sake, in this instance, you know, they are the other party. They are, you know, the potential person who's committing the abuse. So it becomes quite a delicate situation, and that's where our stakeholder engagement and our kind of connections with the community and people like Simone and Edward have become really useful, because we are able to kind of gain a bigger picture to see what exactly is affecting the client and whether they are in that situation that other people think they might be in.
I guess I'd like to speak to a couple of points if I can. I guess I'm feeling a bit disturbed here today that we're speaking about elderly folks, and I wonder if we were speaking about 18 to 25-year-olds, if we'd be thinking about capacity so much. I'm wondering whether that's a specific issue that is only being considered in relation to the elderly, and that would worry me. We have constantly had people come onto the ward, children of elderly folks who have enduring guardianship orders in place, and almost consistently 100% of people think that they have coercive authority in those orders. Somehow the message isn't getting across to either the elderly or their appointed guardians the limits of that particular kind of order. And I'm not sure where the breakdown in that information is coming from, but it's virtually consistent with both the people holding the orders and the people giving the orders out. I'm not sure what really to do about that, but it's frustrating, and it creates a lot of difficulty in my work, a lot of conflict, a lot of misunderstanding for folks. My understanding of best interest law, when somebody loses capacity, best interest law indicates that I need to go back into that person's history and find out when they had capacity, what they were expressing their best interests to be, and for substitute decision makers to be making decisions on the basis of that person's expressed best interests when they had capacity, not for a person holding an enduring guardianship order to make a decision on what they think is good for the elderly person. That's not the elderly person's best interests. That's the guardianship holder's best interest for the elderly person, and they're very, very different themes.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Edward. I think you're so right. I've actually got a client situation now where this has happened, where this man, he's been diagnosed with dementia, and only recently had a geriatrician assessment where they've deemed him to not have capacity to make some sort of complex financial decisions, so they've enacted the enduring power of attorney. So I guess the other side too, which we need to consider, is it can be quite distressing for our clients when this comes into place, because it kind of for them can feel like they've got no rights, their rights are being taken away, they've lost control. This man has already lost control, he's just lost his license as well. He's had a breakdown in a relationship with his partner, and now he's facing the fact that his children now have access to his bank accounts. They potentially will control how much money he can get. So I've spent a lot of time talking to the family about that issue you were saying, Edward, is that they need to be talking to him about what he wants, and making sure he still has control, but making sure he's agreeing, because I've said that issue is that he has to agree to what they're doing, and particularly around lifestyle decisions, because they've got enduring guardianship as well, that if they choose for him, for example, to go into care, he has to agree to that. And if he doesn't, well, then obviously that's when they need to be looking at NCAT applications if that's needed. So I think it's, yeah, your points, yeah, I see that all the time.
Is it all right if I jump in as well just here, and just to sort of say I also agree, and that when someone has a diagnosis of dementia or some level of cognitive decline, it can be on a spectrum. It doesn't mean that they have lost the decision-making capacity, and that it is important to always go to the person, to go to the client, to speak with them directly, to get the information directly from them, to seek their views, and to not assume that we have to go, that they don't have any rights or any contribution. Where possible, it's always about supported decision making, to be able to help them navigate very complex matters if it's in relation to complex finances, and that they need someone to help them go through that and make those decisions in a way that's supported and informed, but ultimately that they're included, that they're at the centre. So often older people become invisible for these reasons, because people start to take over. And it can sometimes be a form of benevolent ageism, where they're trying to do the right thing to protect them, to minimise risk, but actually it causes a lot of harm. And it is very confusing. I think there's a lot of confusion within the aged care sort of services as well. When there is an enduring guardian, it becomes often decisions will be deferred to them for permission or consent as well, which it makes it very complex for the individual themselves.
I think it's really key.
There's
also,
an audience.
It's really key also for all of us to be aware that one of our primary guidances in all of our work is our duty of care to the folks that we serve. We are the government, and I remind all of the people that I work with that I'm representing the government in the room, just to let them know that I'm not a friendly other person in the room. I'm actually part of the government. And I ask them and their families, how much do you want the government to interfere in your mother's life? Really, how much do you want the government to do that? Enduring powers of attorney are terrifying to me. The articles on the ABC over the last fortnight have starkly brought into the public light the oppressiveness of the legislation that guides that office. I'm not talking about the trustee themselves, it's the legislation. And families don't understand that they'll be locked out. They have a charge for those managing those accounts, and these are blunt, minimally helpful tools that we're talking about, and we need to be conscious of them not really fitting very many people's needs, even though people may have capacity issues. It's a tricky business, and
I think, Edward, I think that all of these comments have actually just bring back home that, first of all, no matter how old or what capacity your clients have, you should still listen to their voice and should seek their voice, because it is disempowering for people to ask other people questions about your lives. And also, I think it's really clear from what Jackie and others have said is that we do need some more education about the obligations that guardians have when they are, when they're given this role of looking after an older person. It's a very important role. And certainly I think that that is something that we do need to address. And once again, there are some resources around that, and certainly the Elder Abuse Service are working on resources around that as well, because as Jackie said, a lot of people in aged care don't understand what a guardian is. Do we still talk to the client? Do we only talk to the guardian? And certainly an education package around that would be, fantastic. Bridget, I think, did we have some questions that you wanted to raise?
Yeah, there are actually quite a few questions and comments. I'll go to the ones that are relevant to this most recent part of the discussion first. So the first one is, I noticed that the recent Four Corners investigation into the public trustees made huge assumptions about a high-profile Western Australian family and their financial arrangements as the family pool resources and the risk of financial abuse. How can we avoid similar false assessments in culturally diverse family circumstances?
That's a big question. Mary, do you have anything that you'd like to respond to around that?
Bridget, could you just repeat that last line? My audio's a bit funny. How can we?
Sure. If everyone else wouldn't mind muting themselves, we are having this ongoing echo problem. How can we avoid similar false assessments in culturally diverse family circumstances?
Yeah, look, I haven't watched the Four Corners episode. In some ways, I feel like I don't need to watch it, because I know that while that is our safety net in New South Wales, and many times that safety net works to the advantage of our most vulnerable clients, I also know that it's not 100% foolproof, and that people do fall through the cracks in the most dreadful ways. And, Edward's seen it in his experience, and we've all seen it in our own experience. I guess what I would say is draw on what Edward's spoken about in relation to those nuanced conversations that need to be made around what the older person wants, regardless of whether there's a enduring guardian being appointed. My own experience is that these are really nuanced, sophisticated conversations. We need training and support around what it means, the role of the guardian. We need training and support around our own power as advocates to speak out for our clients. And for me, the most important resource that I have is the power of collaboration with my colleagues. And so when I'm faced with these particularly difficult circumstances, especially around called communities where people aren't aware of cultural nuances, I draw upon the expertise of my colleagues to be able to help me through these conversations. I think this is a really growing area of the law, and with our aging population and demographics, it's something that we're going to have to get a whole lot better at. Reassessing how we work with older people. Sorry, Jackie, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to see if I could add to that question, if that's okay. I think it's really important to stick with the basics as well when working with cold communities. Ensure you always have an interpreter. Ensure you always speak with the client. Find out who's significant within the family, who are the, speak with all the parties involved. I think there are sometimes, depending on the background of the family, there might be different processes within their home country compared to Australia in terms of legislation. So legislation that might be applicable, say in China, may not be applicable within this country. So being able to really have a clear communication with the family, and including the client themselves with an interpreter, informing them of their rights, I think is a good starting point to be able to really understand their situation. What's actually, I missed the Four Corners episode as well, but just to really understand what's going on for that family. And then involving other services, other professionals. Families are so complex and complicated. It never is one person that can assist a family. It takes a group of people, group of professionals and services. So getting the opinion or involving other services that can contribute, that know the family, in order to make your own assessment about what's actually going on for this client and this family, and addressing any concerns or any red flags that might be popping up for you.
Can I just mention also, in New South Wales, I'm not sure about other states, we have a transcultural mental health service that we've used several times with people from CALD communities. They do cultural assessments for people from cultures other than the culture I come from. We found them very, very helpful, giving us a richer understanding of other people's experiences.
I was going to say the same thing, Edward. And there's also, I know on the Central Coast, you've got services like the Northern Settlement Services as well that I will often make contact with just to get some advice. Oh, Mary's waving at me.
No, she's just gone. She went into the dark for a moment. It's just a lighting situation in our
I thought
offices.
maybe you couldn't hear me. All right, no, that's fine.
Fantastic. And I suppose another thing to note is, as practitioners, if you are in a situation where your client, there is an enduring guardian in place, but it seems to be abused, we need to be aware that there are remedies around that clients can be take advantage of. Sasha, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. Yeah, look, there are definitely situations, as we all mentioned, where enduring guardians do take advantage, power of attorney do take advantage of the client. And in those instances, it really depends. I know I'm not a fan of talking about capacity, but it depends if the client still has capacity. So if they're able to make that decision, they can simply revoke it themselves. And it's quite a straightforward process, and it doesn't need to require them to go to the tribunal. In instances where capacity is deemed to have been lost, it will require an application to the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, so the Guardianship division there, to review the enduring guardian or the power of attorney. So we've definitely given advice on how to support clients to do that. If they themselves can't do it, then we'll speak with whoever's contacted the service, whether there's a support person in their life that's willing to assist in making that application, to go to the Guardianship Tribunal and to be able to review the situation. So there's definitely no reason for someone to be stuck in a situation where they are suffering abuse at the hand of their guardian or power of attorney. And we do really encourage people to keep an eye out on the older people in their lives to make sure that they are in safe situations if the person themselves can't recognise what's going on.
There's just a comment on that as well, that currently when an enduring power of attorney signs their acceptance, there's absolutely no requirement that they get any advice or training in how to use it. Enduring guardians do in New South Wales, so it would not be too difficult to implement. The New South Wales Trustee and Guardian have a private manager's support service. Is there a similar function in the Office of the Public Guardian?
Can I just speak to the first question? Just big picture, there's a whole lot of discussion nationally around harmonising powers of attorney because they're different across every state. And in that process, there's been a lot of reflection on the gaps in powers of attorney. And one of them is that people don't really understand what their role is as a power of attorney. And so hopefully, as part of a response to those national discussions, those issues will be elevated and addressed. Oh, and the second question about
that question, Bridget?
Yeah, sure. The New South Wales Trustee and Guardian have a private manager's support service. Is there a similar function in the Office of the Public Guardian?
Not as far as I know. Not as far as I know. I mean, I think NCAT acts as a safety net. You get appointed as an enduring guardian, and off you go. And if it goes south, you're going to end up probably in NCAT, and that will be your review process.
Yeah, the public guardian don't have that kind of branch. They do have very helpful duty guardians, but there is no specific team in there to guide anybody in that role.
There's another sort of question on this point. What are the legal implications for a person who is power of attorney? As I did experience a situation where a son and his wife used his father's, their residence money. It was reported that the worker reported their suspicions as financial abuse, and through an investigation was found to be correct, but they were never privy to what happened afterwards. The question at the end of that is, what happens with this sort of situation?
Okay, so in New South Wales, what happens is that you can make, if you've had money misappropriated under a power of attorney, your legal remedy is to go to the Supreme Court Equity Division and commence an action for a breach of fiduciary duty. My own personal opinion is that that's a great remedy for an older person, but you know, to commence an action in the Supreme Court, there's a filing fee of $1,400. It's probably going to cost you about $10,000 to $20,000 to do it. You're going to need a barrister and a solicitor. It could cost you, you know, how long's a piece of string? 20,000 or 120,000. And at the end of the day, what happens is, if you're successful, the court will say, yes, you know, you're owed $50,000, but if the person has spent the money, there's no way you're going to get it back. So what we often say is, say with financial elder abuse, that there's very little consequence for people who abuse that money. So in other states, so in Queensland and in Victoria, you can go to the local tribunal. In Queensland, it's QCAT. In Victoria, it's VCAT. You can lodge an application. If you're a pensioner, it's $5. So there's a much more immediate and accessible response. Just part of the many kind of inequities that older people experience when trying to seek a remedy.
Do you mind if I run through other audience questions?
Is this a point, and I wonder, are these points that lawyers would make to an elderly person who's sitting with them discussing appointing an enduring power of attorney, or are they not raised? Just as, you know, because in healthcare, we have a legal duty to inform people of risks. Do lawyers have a duty to inform the elderly of risks? Because that sounds like a significant risk to me of appointing somebody an enduring power of attorney.
Look, we do, lawyers do have a duty to point out risks, but that is our system in New South Wales. You know, there is a remedy if somebody abuses a power of attorney. We don't often talk about that. What we do talk about is what the obligations of somebody appointed under a power of attorney are. And we do talk about what an important document a power of attorney is. You know, especially if it's an enduring power of attorney that comes into action once a person's lost capacity. So there's a lot of discussion around that so that the older person knows the meaning of the document itself.
Thanks, Mary. And I asked that question for my practice in particular, so I can raise those issues with people in the future that I'm engaging with. Thank you for that.
I think if I can just add very briefly that often financial abuse or elder abuse can be a result of someone very close, like a close family member, a trusted person taking advantage of the elderly person. And at the time of making a power of attorney, often they've nominated that person because they care for them, they trust them, they're a significant person, and they would never imagine that that person would take advantage of them. So we do, it is, I guess, an imperfect document that has some flaws, but it goes back to I guess why we asked that ages poll at the beginning, because being aware of our views of our older, you know, our family members who are older, who might need our assistance is important, because, you know, we need to do what's fair, to do what's right, and sometimes circumstances in life, unfortunately, steer people the wrong way, and they make choices not because they're trying to harm a loved one, but because of their own situation, and they're not just being able to manage. So I think having that ongoing communication with an older person, to always have them at the center of our minds, to understand their experiences. You know, how do they, you know, what do they think about this decision, or what would, you know, what are their views, what are their wishes, their goals? Having them at the center will keep our focus on what's important for them, so we can reflect on our own decisions, that we're doing the right thing by them and what they would have liked. Sorry.
Shall I proceed
Thanks,
with
Jackie.
some more questions from the audience at this point?
Yeah, please do, Bridget.
Okay, so we have a few around the use of interpreters. How do you ensure that the interpreters you engage are properly qualified to provide professional interpreter services? Do you always ask them to provide their NAATI number and or see their credential?
I think through legal aid, we book interpreters that are through a telephone interpreter service, and they do need qualifications to be part of that service. And if they're not qualified at the level that a legal service requires, that's actually brought to our attention. So I'm not sure what other protocols other services have, but I feel that the one at legal aid seems to work quite well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I mean, we just have we have a certain level that the organisation you know, uses in terms of interpreters, and we just assume that they're qualified to be able to deliver the service. But you know, I worked for a long time out in Fairfield, where 80% of our clients used interpreters. Just a couple of reflections. So one is, when you're dealing with a smaller demographic. So if you, I mean, I know that when I worked out in Fairfield, when we dealt with the Armenian population, it was a very small population. So we had to be very mindful when we were using interpreters that they weren't too connected to the community, because otherwise people won't speak out. And so we would often sort of make sure that, I mean, if the client kind of raised the issue about the interpreter or knew the interpreter, we would very sort of subtly kind of end that conversation and make sure another interpreter was used. The other thing is, you know, when you're using interpreters, is like common sense. If the client responds to your answer and takes 4 minutes to answer you in another language, and the interpreter interprets that in, you know, 10 seconds, then you know something's wrong. I mean, I've had the pleasure of working with some really super good interpreters, and when you have a highly qualified interpreter, the conversation is kind of seamless. They're there in the background, enabling that conversation to take place, but they're not obtrusive. As a solicitor, I've often ended sessions with interpreters because I haven't felt that that interpreter was responding culturally appropriately to the client, wasn't supporting the client to be able to advocate for themselves. And so I don't have any hesitation about doing that. And I draw on my experience and my cues from the client as well too. What about in health? Does anybody want to add their health perspective?
Yeah, it's really hit and miss in health. Some of the stuff that I do is at the beginning of an interview, before I go and bring the person in, is I put boundaries down for the interpreter, and I tell them what I want you to do now is only say to the person what you hear me say. You're not here to define what I'm saying. You're not here to explain what I'm saying. Please just repeat what I'm saying to the person. I keep my I keep each soundbite fairly short, allow the interpreter to then give it to the elderly person. Then another short soundbite. I have the interpreter sitting away from the table, and I only look at the person that I'm speaking to. I try to ask the elderly person, I try to encourage them to do the same back. It's not easy for a lot of folks, but that's what I try and do. I have a colleague who has a green and a black list of health interpreters, and they will only use people on the green list. Their experience has been terrible with interpreters. But like you say, it's ending sessions early and not persisting with somebody who's doing an unsatisfactory job, because that's giving a disservice to the elderly person and their family. And why would we do that just for the sake of finishing the hour off that we'd set aside?
Yeah, there's been some comments that interpreters do not necessarily seem to need qualifications to work with government contracted companies to provide interpreting service. So making assumptions is not always the best thing. And there's a question along these lines as well. How do you talk to elderly members of a call community?
I think the point that Edward raised is really important about talking to the client and not to the interpreter. And I think that is something that Simone's raised as well in preparation for this webinar, is that even if it's similar for when you might have an enduring guardian in a room with a client as well, you're still talking to the client. And so just still always trying to make that client focus, your focus on the client is really important. Simone, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
No, I guess just to say that, yeah, it is really important with that connection and to build that rapport with the clients. At the moment, the last few times I've had to use interpreters, it's been over the phone. They haven't actually been there in person. So it can be a little bit awkward, but again, I guess you haven't got that third person there. But I think just following on from what Edward was saying is just really making sure when I'm asking questions, I'm asking it to them, looking at them, giving them eye contact, being really clear, not asking too long questions, as Edward was saying, just sort of a short amount so that can be interpreted and they can respond. Is really important.
The other thing I've noticed during the pandemic is that often if I have an interpreter on the phone, I know they're going through the checkout at Woolies. I mean, or they're picking up their kids from school. And while, we've all got life admin that we need to do, I kind of just don't tolerate that. I just will call it to an end at that time and just say, look, unless you can blah, 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 give me your 100% or telephone interpreter service, we need to end it now and we need to rebook. I just have noticed an increase in it, and I'm not quite sure whether it's because there's been an increased demand for interpreters, and as a result of that, perhaps the standards have kind of slipped a little bit. But I'm all about accountability, and if we have unsatisfactory experiences with interpreters, as an advocate for our client, we need to sort of feed that back to the organisation in a respectful way. And I don't have any hesitation about doing that.
I might move on now from that topic in terms of the questions. There's just one that goes back to a point Edward was making about supportive decision making. It's a comment really. This happens, Edward, with those with disability and dementia. Guardians feel they have power, and supportive decision making should be taken into account. Just a couple more questions, if you don't mind me going to those now. One that goes to some of the terminology that the panel's been using is the client-focused care and client-centered care new terminology.
Why is Edward laughing? Are you on mute?
It's not for me really. And look, because I work in health, it's a bit of a, I find it amusing. Look, I don't work with clients. I don't work with consumers. I work with people. And when folks say to me, you know, what do you call these people? I say, well, I call them people. You know, I work for the government serving the community, and I work with people. I understand doctors have patients, psychologists. I don't, just because I work in health. And it's really important for me on a personal, spiritual and professional level to acknowledge that I'm not working with an object that has a specific marketplace name. I'm working with another human being, and that keeps me connected on that level, human being to human being. Yeah, it's just a personal.
Thank you, Edward.
I think within the legal profession, working with disadvantaged clients has changed the way we work with people. And I think, you know, when I first started as a lawyer 20 years ago, I kind of thought clients came to see me and I told them, you know, what I thought they wanted to hear or what the law was or something like that. And I think my evolution as a lawyer, and especially within legal aid, is that we've had to change that mindset. And part of changing that mindset was bringing in like a language to help us change that mindset. And so part of that language was, you know, client focused, client centered services. So I think it was a language that was created to help us shift the focus away from ourselves towards what the client wants. That's kind of my take on it.
Thank you. And one last question. Oh, sorry, Edward.
From a Marxist point of view, and from the early 70s, when we started getting individualism and the marketplace consumerism shoved down our throats, the idea is that the people we work with became consumers, became clients, became things that we applied labels to. It was a liberal political decision that supported consumerism in the marketplace, and it drifted into healthcare, as far as I could tell, and anyway, from my conflict critical studies at uni.
There's another comment on that point from the audience too. Working as a trainer and assessor and in the healthcare industry, I know it as person-centered care, so that helps to keep me focused and updated. Just one last audience question on another topic is community mental health is chronically underfunded. How does legal aid advocate for mental health reform?
Mary, do you know, this is a big policy question.
Early ones. Well, our most powerful resource in legal aid are our clients' experiences. And we try and assist our clients on, you know, on what their particular issue is. But then we also try and use our clients' experience to elevate them to identify systemic issues and to bring about change. We're the largest law firm in New South Wales. We've got a dedicated mental health advocacy service that services mental health consumers across a range of areas. We run test case litigation. We advocate for law reform. It comes to us through our clients' stories and our clients' experiences. So it's really important for us to connect with services that also work with that same client group so that we can harness that power of collaboration to make sure that the most important issues get raised.
And Mary, if I could just add on to that point, that recently with the Prevalence study, psychological abuse or the risk of psychological abuse was found to be one of the highest that people have identified as experiencing. So with that, hopefully, there within your law reform and the discussion that's happening from a higher up level, mental health services will be absolutely critical to supporting people and protecting people who are at risk of psychological abuse. So hopefully we will, we can hope.
Yeah.
You-
Sorry, Jackie, you
I just
finished?
want to,
I was just going
can
to
I
add
just
that.
say, Jackie, just to clarify, sorry, Simone,
Okay.
in relation, just for the listeners, the prevalence study is actually the elder abuse prevalence study that was released in December last year, and it's been a really important study for people who work with older people to identify the prevalence and types of elder abuse, amongst other things. And we'll send a link around with our handouts after this so that people can have a look at that study to learn more. But Simone, sorry, I cut you off. Can you go on?
No, that's all right. I was just going to, I guess, just add, because, yeah, just talking about the importance of, mental health, and obviously, people with mental health issues are at increased risk of abuse, but also at increased risk of developing mental health issues. But certainly within the older people's mental health service on the Central Coast, where I'm working, is my position, which is currently temporary. I am working hard to try and secure more permanent funding, but they've certainly identified the risks as part of that service. This position is only one that I know of across New South Wales Health. I don't know of any other positions, but I guess it's a step to sort of identify them, people with mental health issues at an increased risk. So it's really positive, and I think I've been able to share, being able to provide some support across the district as well within the health service. So I just wanted to, highlight that.
I guess I'd like to say also that, this workshop, as I understand it, was put on by Legal Aid. So this is a terrific example of what Legal Aid are doing to promote this issue. And the aspect that I want to commend Legal Aid on in promoting this issue is that it's not, it's futile for me to expect government to fix everything. What I need to do also is participate in the political process, particularly in relation to who I think about voting for. And when I go to vote at the next federal election, am I going to vote for a tax cut, or am I going to vote for public services? Which interests am I going to support when I go to election? When I speak to my friends, when I speak to my partners, how am I going to speak to them about the political process, the way they participate in it? Is it community focused, or is it self-interest? I see this particular workshop as community focused.
And can I just jump in there quickly? Sorry, Jenny, I was just going to make one more suggestion, I guess, for people when they're meeting with their clients, that having that difficult conversation sometimes is important. I know clients might come to a solicitor and they might get their advice and they're not ready to take those actions, but being able to also identify that, they're actually experiencing some really tough times at the moment and they seem really upset. And, do you have other supports? Do you have someone to talk to? Do you have someone that, that you can speak openly about? And even suggest that refer on, that collaborative type approach by suggesting that they go and, if they've got a trusted GP, then go and talk to their GP so they can seek out that counselling and that emotional, mental health support that they might need to be able to reach a point where they may be ready to take the options available through a legal course of action. If they're not emotionally sort of strong enough to make decisions and know what actions they want to take, they might need to go ahead and get some support first for their own emotional and mental well-being. So being able to pass on some information about how to do that. And with COVID, fortunately, there's been some more creative ways of accessing counselling too. It can be online, it can be via phone, so it can be accessible for people who are isolated at home, who don't have transport or what have you. So it can be good to know what resources are out there and be imaginative, I guess, in looking at services.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for raising that point. And I think it's really important for all legal aid employees, but community workers generally, to build up those referral points, to know your support services in the local community, so that if someone is seeking help, they're usually not just seeking legal help. There are other issues at play, and being able to link them in to support services to help them with the non-legal aspects of their situation is really important. Bridget's just shared some referral points on the screen now, and this will be circulated with an email after this webinar ceases. I note that it's 12 o'clock and we did say that our webinar would finish at 12. I believe that we have an extra 15 minutes of airtime, if we can call it that, for further questions. But just wanted to say thank you to everybody who will be leaving us now, for giving us your time today. Thank you so much for our amazing panel members for sharing your experiences and giving us some things to think about going forward when we are working with our older people. And thank you so much for Bridget for all your tech help, and we'll stay online for a few more questions, but thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We do have another 15 minutes of airtime, so if the audience have further questions, or if there were more discussion points that you wanted to work through, we do have a little bit more time for that. I'll just share some very positive comments that from the audience. We're lucky to have Edward's ideas this morning. Thank you. The team of social worker plus lawyer rocks for older persons. And then there's just some thank yous coming through. But yeah, is there anything else that the panel wanted to cover in this morning's discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to speak. Sorry. No, you go, Mary.
Can I just do a shout out on the same theme of social workers and lawyers working together? So this is the first time I've done it in this team, and it's been a bit of a revelation for me as a lawyer. And I just can't, I mean, because I work in elder abuse solely, and it's such a complex area for older people to speak out about, you know, I often say the law is just a really blunt remedy. So take into account that situation where, you know, you want the adult child to move out of the home, and we just say, look, get an ABO. I mean, that is just such useless information to an older person that's stuck in that really complex dynamic. I don't really know how this service would work without social workers, and just a huge shout out to them for improving my capacity to be able to identify and ask really relevant questions, and you know, in our particular service, to be able to hold the client in our service for a length of time, so that the social workers can work on what those underlying dynamics are, because as I said, just giving that blunt legal remedy is absolutely of no use to the client. So what we do is we hold the client in the service, the social workers kind of work with the client to unpick those family dynamics, to help the older person identify what their goals are, identify the family dynamics that have contributed to the situation that they find themselves in. And then, you know, us lawyers often sit in the background to be able to provide the legal advice when the opportunity is right. And as I said, I think in the service that we work in, I just don't think it would exist without the social workers that are in our service, number one, and then the collaboration that we have with other services like Simone Services to be able to collaboratively work on what can be a really complex issue for older people.
I would like to add to that too, Mary, because I think that sometimes the law can be very black and white, and it's easy to forget that our clients aren't. And I think that having watched your service work together, it's the social workers that bring in all that other really important information and make sure that that's heard. And so it is a great collaboration or a great service that you have those social workers working with the team, and they really do allow for much greater, much better outcomes for our clients. So yeah, that's fantastic. Do we have any other comments or questions, Bridget? Or comments? We've got Edward?
2 points if I can. Last week, I discovered that New South Wales have, in the area that I work in southern Sydney, an aged crime officer, a little bit like a DVLO. Never knew they existed before, and I've been working in aged care for like 15 years. So there are things out there that are waiting to be discovered to help us serve the elderly better. A thing that I realised when I was about 17 or 18 years in social work that 20 years earlier, I thought I was speaking simply to the elderly in acute care wards. You know, I was speaking as simply as I could to these folks, thinking I was doing them a service. And then it took me 17 or 18 years later to realise that it was simple to me with a university education. It wasn't, in fact, simple at all. It was just, I was horrified when I realised how insightless I'd been and how self-centered I'd been in thinking I was doing this terrific stuff when I was only making myself feel better and not really helping the elderly at all. I wasn't really going to where they were. So that, you know, that the communication stuff and the reflective communication stuff is essential. And yeah, most of the folks, the older they are, the less school they went to. It's really important for me to be conscious of that.
For those of you that heard Edwards refer to aged crime prevention officers, so I'll just give a little blurb about them. So aged crime prevention officers were a specialised unit set up by police to better identify and respond to vulnerable communities, and obviously elder abuse sits in there. It was supposed to have been rolled out to every, not quite sure how police divide up areas, but it was supposed to be rolled out all across New South Wales. It hasn't. It's sort of stalled about a third of the way through, but it's the police response to, you know, working in a better way with older people. And where our experience in this service is that where there is an age crime prevention officer, so we work in the Lower Hunter area, we get 100% more referrals to our service. So they're a great move by the police force, and I'd love to see it rolled out across the rest of the state.
And can I just make a comment for our internal legal aid staff on the clear communication point, which I think is really important. And having done courses on that myself, I know that it is a continued learning process and that you have to revisit it. So through our learning and development at Legal Aid, there's some really, really great courses that you can learn about communicating more effectively and more concisely and more simply with our clients so that they're getting the best outcomes from our communications with them. And I really highly encourage everybody to seek out that training. It's really fantastic. And it is a continued learning curve. So yeah, have a look on LMS for our internal attendees today. Did anyone else want to add to
any last comments? Yeah, from the panel.
Well, it's been a really great discussion. Thank you so much to everybody again. Thank you for being our tech whiz, Bridget, and to the community legal education team for all of your support. And
it's my pleasure. There was one last question, but I think that we may perhaps take it on notice. It's about asking where they can access some of the legislation around this topic, working with the elderly. I think we might need to clarify that in a little bit more detail and get back to them by email after this session, unless there's something that stands out to you, Mary.
I think the website, the Ageing and Disability Commission website, is a great starting point. They have a resources tab, and probably underneath that resources tab you will find links to legislation. The other website that's really worthwhile looking at is the Compass website. So Compass is a national website that is specifically focused on elder abuse. It has a wide range of resources on it. Yeah, a wide range of resources, looking at, working with older people, specific elder abuse topics, lots of training videos. So if you're a stakeholder and you're listening to this and you want to raise awareness of, your team's ability to identify and respond to elder abuse or working with older people, you will find a training resource on it.
And
Thank
can
you,
I just
Mary.
add one more plug there, Bridget, sorry to interrupt, but one of our colleagues, Richard McCullough, who is a solicitor with our service, but also a practitioner, has written a book on elder law. So if you're really wanting to dig into the legal side of things, that might be something that you can look up as well. So that's Richard McCullough, Elder Law.
I would encourage people also to do Google searches for informed consent, best interest, duty of care. It's not a lot of reading. It's fairly easy to get a basic understanding of the legal guidances around those principles that are the base ways, the most primary ways that we must act when we're engaging with our folks, particularly the elderly. You don't need, yes, the legislation's essentially important, but Rogers v. Whitaker 1992 initially defined those for healthcare in the way that we practice them today. It's easy to find. It's not a lot of reading.
They're great tips, and I'll make sure that I include those in another email that goes out to all our participants today. Thanks everyone for your to the panel for your participation today. There's some very positive comments coming through that New South Wales is so in front compared to WA. It's an insightful session. Thank you so very much for informative presentation by very skilled panelists. So it sounds like we've been right on the mark in organising this webinar today. So thanks everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you for
Oh,
asking
just
me.
one last thing. This is being recorded and it will be available on New South Wales YouTube channel in a day or so. I'll end the webinar now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.